Recently, I picked up this rather tiny Sony camera for just $100 and decided to take it with me on a recent trip all the way to Vietnam. And after taking a lot of photos with it, I came to a very simple conclusion. Whilst it's not the perfect camera, honestly it is far from it, and it does have a lot of flaws, it actually has everything you could possibly want and need to kickstart your photography journey. Let me explain. This is the Sony NEX-5, a camera released back in 2010. It launched alongside its lower spec brother, the Sony NEX-3, a camera I also have experience using. This was Sony's first attempt at a mirrorless interchangeable camera, but at the time it wasn't taken all that seriously. A contributing factor for that was possibly because Sony themselves weren't entirely sure who they were marketing this camera towards. Its compact size and minimalistic design made it look more like a point and shoot camera rather than a serious interchangeable lens camera. And when you placed it next to a DSLR, it didn't exactly look like it belonged in the same league. But what many people didn't realise was that under the hood, this pocket rocket could actually compete against the big players. Without the need of a mirror box, mirrorless cameras could be designed much smaller and lighter. Sony knew this and decided to lean all the way in, making a camera as small and compact as possible, but with one major advantage. Around the same time of this camera's release, Panasonic and Olympus were also venturing into this new mirrorless world, but those cameras featured a smaller micro four thirds sensor, while this camera featured a larger APS-C sensor. The same sensor size found in most entry-level DSLRs and even some professional level DSLRs, and Sony managed to squeeze all this into a camera that's smaller than a stack of pancakes. For those wondering, the main difference between an APS-C and micro four thirds sensor comes down to the crop factor. With an APS-C sensor, any lens you attach will have a 1.5 times crop, whilst a micro four thirds sensor applies a 2 times crop. So let's take this 35mm lens as an example. On an APS-C sensor, it effectively becomes a 50mm lens, whilst on a micro four thirds sensor, it'd be around 70mm. Internally, the NEX-5 is decent enough, but who this camera was initially aimed towards was still not entirely straightforward. Take the menus and the interface for example. On one hand, it's obvious that Sony wanted to make the camera as beginner friendly as possible. By default, you get helpful pop-up tips that explain various functions and settings. There's even an 85-page manual built into the camera offering everything from basic guidance to shooting tips. They even simplified technical terms like swapping out aperture for something called background defocus. So instead of learning what aperture actually is and how it functions, the camera allows you to spin a dial to make the background go from super out of focus to all in focus. I also actually low-key like that there is a diagram on the camera itself explaining shutter speed and aperture, showing how faster or slower shutter speed affect motion blur and how wider or narrower apertures impact depth of field. As a beginner, that's actually quite helpful if you want to understand aperture past the simplified defocus terminology. But at the same time, the NEX-5 includes digital mode dial with MA/SP shooting modes, giving you access to full manual controls, customizable buttons, and all the flexibility you'd expect from a DSLR. In a way, this camera has the ability to evolve with you, becoming more capable as you become more experienced. And I've taken the time to tweak this camera to feel less like a cartoonish toy and more like a professional tool. Well, apart from one thing, I changed the menu display to pink because honestly, how often do you get to have your camera's menus be pink? But beyond the fabulous colour scheme, the first thing I did was switch the camera to shoot in RAW. This gives me more flexibility when editing my photos in post. From there, I made a few more key tweaks. I turned off the AF illuminator, enabled the grid lines to help with composition, and disabled the long exposure noise reduction. I also silenced the annoying beep sounds, turned off the pop-up tips, and bumped up the LCD screen brightness by +2, though I wouldn't recommend using sunny weather mode on this camera as it can completely throw off your exposure. As for shooting modes, I've mostly been using aperture priority. It's my go-to about 90% of the time, and that applies to all the cameras I shoot with, not just this one. Manual mode is there if you want it, but with the limited control points on this body, it can feel a bit fiddly to use in practice. You also get a couple of customizable buttons. I've set this bottom one here to ISO and this middle one to focus area, so I can make quick adjustments to my focus on the fly. From my time shooting shooting with this camera, I've definitely come across some downsides, which to be fair kind of comes with the territory for a camera this old. For starters, you've probably already noticed there is no EVF on this camera, so you're relying entirely on that LCD screen to compose your shots, and in classic Sony fashion, the screen quality isn't exactly stellar. It struggles in harsh light, isn't very colour accurate, and overall is a bit naff. The battery life is also pretty pants. This camera is running on those older Sony batteries, so I definitely recommend picking up a spare one. You can check out Duracell. Duracell actually makes some really good budget friendly ones, and now I actually can't get it back in the hole. It's not the first time I've said that. The autofocus system relies on contrast detect rather than the faster, more accurate phase detect AF. In my experience, the continuous AF is pretty unreliable and useless. No matter the lens, the camera hunts for focus constantly but never locks on. Because of that, I found single shot AF much more dependable, so while it won't keep up with fast-paced sports, action or wildlife, it can handle slower moving subjects like general car, street, portrait or landscape photography. The menus are also an utter shambles and complete mess. At this point it doesn't feel like a flaw, more like a Sony tradition.
Traditions.
Of course, the controls are somewhat limited like I've mentioned, so if you do want something with a few more control options, you could always look at the NEX-5R or 5T. Both offer additional features like a dedicated control dial, but those cameras are a little bit more pricey. The ISO performance isn't great either. It starts at 200 and goes all the way up to a staggering 12,800, but you never want to get to those numbers because as soon as you do, your image starts looking like Swiss cheese. The 200 base ISO can also be quite limiting, especially if you're shooting on bright sunny days and using a fast aperture. You'll most definitely need an ND filter to cut down the excess light. It's not all bad though, because a lot of this camera's hidden potential lies ever so slightly beyond the APS-C sensor. The E-mount, one mount to rule them all. When Sony first entered the mirrorless market with this camera, they chose one lens mount and stuck with it. That means that this camera from 2010 shares the same mount as my Sony a6400, my Sony a6700, and even my full frame Sony a7C Mark II. In fact, it's the same mount as Sony's cinema line of cameras, meaning any lens you buy for this camera will also work on other Sony cameras you might upgrade to in the future, saving you a ton of money and giving you a more future-proof setup. And yes, that also means you compare this camera with something completely utterly absurd like the Sony 70-200 f2.8 G Master Mark II. This combo looks ridiculous and I love it. As amusing as those combos are, you probably want something that's A, smaller and B, a bit more budget friendly, and this is where the E-mount still holds a massive advantage over other camera manufacturers. Because it's been around for so long, especially compared to systems like the Canon RF mount or the Nikon Z mount or Z mount or potato mount, whatever you want to call it, the E mount is packed with affordable lenses, both new and used. Plus, Sony opened up the mount to third-party manufacturers early on, so you've got access to a massive range of glass at nearly every price point. The photos you've seen throughout today's video so far have been shot on one of two lenses, the Viltrox 35mm f1.7 and the Sony 50mm f1.8. Both are super affordable lenses. You could pick up the Viltrox 35mm f1.7 new for just $179, and that'll bring your grand total setup including the camera to just $280, or you could pick up the Sony 50mm f1.8 for around $110 used, bringing your grand total setup again including the camera to just $210. If you do have a slightly larger budget to spend on lenses, then I do have some recommendations for you. For an all-in-one zoom lens, look no further than the Sigma 18-50 f2.8. It's one of the best, and personally it's one of my favourite zooms for APS-C. If you've got a bit more of a budget to spend on a prime lens, I'd recommend either the Sigma 30mm f1.4 or my personal favourite prime lens from Sigma, the Sigma 56mm f1.4. And of course the classic nifty 50 we've just spoken about and the Viltrox 35mm f1.7 are both budget friendly options if you are wanting to remain on a tighter budget. Everything that I've mentioned mentioned throughout today's video will be linked in the description below if you want to check any of it out for yourself. If you are interested in picking one of these cameras up for yourself, I can't leave any direct links since it is used gear, but I would recommend looking on sites like Facebook Marketplace, eBay, MPB Photographic, or if you have one available in your country, CEX. That is where I got this camera from, and surprisingly, it came with a 5-year warranty. I don't know if I'll ever need it, but I got it. The images produced by the NEX-5 might actually surprise you. Sure, it only has a 14.2 megapixel sensor, and you might be thinking at this point, well, my phone has more megapixels than that. But thanks to the flexibility of the E-mount system, you can use a variety of lenses to achieve different looks that simply aren't possible on a phone. And megapixels are everything. In fact, I've used cameras like the ZV-E1 for photography, which has even fewer megapixels, and the images are still fantastic. The raw files from the NEX-5 deliver the sharpness and flexibility you'd expect from a modern camera, allowing plenty of room to push and pull edits in post. While 14.2 megapixels does limit how much you can crop, getting framing right in camera means you'll have nothing to worry about. And if you are planning on just sharing your photos on platforms like Instagram, you'll have nothing to worry about with the resolution. And just a quick little self-plug here, all the photos you've seen throughout today's video have been edited using my Lightroom presets. If you want to check them out for yourself, a link for them will be down in the description below. Overall, the Sony NEX-5 isn't a perfect camera. By God, it is far from it. But if you are a broke photographer, you're working on a limited budget, and you want to get into the world of interchangeable mirrorless cameras, then this camera gives you all the tools and attributes needed to get started. It's also worth remembering that this isn't meant to be the camera you'll own forever. It is an investment for now, a solid stepping stone if you're a photographer looking at making that move from shooting on a phone, a point and shoot camera, or even a bridge camera. In the next few weeks or so, I am going to drop a POV using this camera around the streets of Hanoi in Vietnam. It is going to be amazing, so if you don't want to miss that, subscribe and stay tuned. And if you did enjoy this video, I have got more videos focused on budget gear, which you can check out right here. And with all that said and done, my friends, until next time, create, explore, and inspire.